Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do my book haul for the month of June. I can't believe June is ending. We are halfway through 2023. That's a wild thing that is a conversation for something else, but the good news is that because June is ending, we get to do my book haul. This is a bit of a smaller book haul for 2023. I only have 4 books to really talk about in this video. I do have 2 others that I'm just going to mention quickly because I am trying to think about my book hauls a little bit differently. If you follow along, you know, in January, we expanded my library. My library had been much smaller than this. There was less space for books. So this really opened things up. And as a result, my book hauls in 2023 so far have been a lot bigger. I've also made a bit of a pivot into being something of a collector. And that has been interesting and unexpected. I would not have predicted that that would turn out to be the case, but definitely there has been a change in the way I purchase books. And I'm hoping that for the rest of 2023, we'll be getting to smaller book hauls like this because through my book haul revisits, I'll have my most recent one as well as my most recent book haul down below if you'd like to check them out. I'm trying to be more intentional as a book purchaser. I'm trying to think a little bit more intelligently about books that I would like to purchase and bring into my library and what I am more likely to read in a physical form as opposed to audio or maybe get from the library, things like that. And I think I have been doing better. It's just the expansion of the library caused things to go a little bit crazy. And again, collecting kind of swooped in. So the books that I am not really going to talk about are books that I have already had on my shelves and in one case at least have already hauled. The first one is The Confessions of Nat Turner by William Styron. So I actually already have a copy of this book, but it's a Franklin Library edition. So I hauled it earlier this year. But I did in the month of June find this paperback copy of it at my local used bookstore, and I did pick it up. I just don't want to talk about it in the haul video because I've already hauled it, and it just doesn't make sense to talk about it twice. So I think I'm going to stop talking about things like this in my book hauls. I just felt like pointing this one out to sort of explain. I do want to mention that I got a hardcover copy of Beloved by Toni Morrison. One of my new weird collector things is that when we expanded the library, I decided to pull out all of my Pulitzer books and put them on their own dedicated shelf. I'm doing a project where I'm reading every book that has won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And along the way, I decided that I wanted to own a copy of every book that has won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And now that I've done that, I'm starting to think that I want hardcover copies of all of the books. I had already been thinking that I wanted a hardcover copy of Beloved ever since I read it last year. I have already done a whole video on Beloved, by the way. I'll put it in the description box down below. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what this is about. But because I love Toni Morrison so much and because I think this is such a tremendous book, I really wanted a hardcover of it. But I'm thinking, I have a lot of paperback editions of Pulitzer books from the 90s to the present, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time and effort finding hardcover copies of them right now. I'll keep my eyes open and, if I run into them, great, and they're affordable, great. But, I'm trying to ease things down a little bit. So I'm thinking I would like hardcover copies of them when there is one available. But, that's its whole other thing. I was just really excited to find this edition of the book because you don't typically find hardcover copies of Beloved in used bookstores. Maybe it's a thing where people hold on to hardcover copies of this book when they have it. Maybe it's a thing where when they end up in used bookstores, people snap them up really quickly. So the likelihood that you will just stumble on them goes down because people are picking them up and purchasing them that quickly. But the copies that you find online tend to be really expensive. So I actually managed to find one and it worked out pretty great. I actually got it from thrift books, and I don't want to throw shade, but I stopped using thrift books at the beginning of 2023 because I had a couple of little customer service things, but mostly the big problem was a lot of the time the description of what you are ordering really doesn't match what shows up, and they don't seem interested in fixing that, and I don't want to roll the dice that what I get is actually what I ordered. But I had a credit for my birthday because June is my birthday month, and I saw a listing that said it was a hardcover of Toni Morrison's Beloved for an affordable price, so I got it, and thankfully it showed up actually as what it is. I mean, there are little things where it's not a perfect copy, but again, just to have a hardcover copy of this book on my shelf, I'm really excited. So in the future, I am going to be taking things like that where I've already hauled it, already talked about it. If I find interesting editions of something, I'm not going to talk about it in a haul video. So just wanted to mention those before we get into the actual book haul of these 4 books. Let's start with that. But before we do, I also wanted to mention the shirt that I'm wearing. So I actually purchased this at Missoula Pride. I meant to wear it in my Friday Reads video this past week, and I forgot. So I figured it is something that I purchased in the month of June. Why not just roll it into my book haul video? It comes from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. It says, "Be the voice, #stop suicide." And I just thought that was a really good message worth supporting. It's a good foundation. So there's the logo on the side. So I thought I'd wear it and mention it here. And you can certainly check them out if you would like to support them. I'll put a link to the website down below. Just wanted to mention that. Again, I wanted to mention it in my Friday Reads video and forgot. Let's get into the actual book haul proper for the month of June. The first book is This Other Eden by Paul Harding. Paul Harding, like William Styron and Toni Morrison, is in the Pulitzer Prize family of authors. He won what I would say is the most surprising Pulitzer Prize win of my lifetime, because Tinkers is the book he won for in 2010, and people just didn't really know about that book. I was working in a bookstore at the time. I hadn't heard of it. The New York Times had not even reviewed the book Tinkers when it won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, so they had to scramble to catch up to it. It just was a very low-key book. And Paul Harding has kept a sort of low-key presence in the publishing world since that win. This is only his 3rd book. So he had Tinkers, and then he published Enon, which is a sort of sequel to Tinkers. I don't know to what degree, and now this one. And this is something I heard about earlier this year. It immediately caught my attention because, again, he is part of the Pulitzer Prize family of authors, but then the description of the book sounds amazing. So that really caught my attention. And then in recent weeks, I've been getting feedback from people who leave comments on my videos that they have read it since I first talked about it, and they loved it. This has been getting really great feedback from people. And then the BBC Culture top books of 2023 so far put it on their list. I did a reaction to that. It will be down below. Time Magazine named it as one of their best books of 2023 so far. I did a video about that. It will be down below. So this seems to be a book that a lot of people are reading and loving, and it's definitely gaining momentum as we head into the end of the year. So you start to wonder if this is going to factor into conversations about, say, the Booker long list, which is coming, the National Book Award, which will be coming. They should usually announce their long list toward the end of summer. And then like the New York Times Best Books of the Year, maybe, we'll find out. And then, of course, the Pulitzer Prize for next year. It's a hard road for that because he does have another book. But point just being, there's suddenly a lot of possibility for this book. Let's do the description of the book that is online. In 1792, formerly enslaved Benjamin Honey and his Irish wife Patience discover an island where they can make a life together. Over a century later, the Honeys' descendants and a diverse group of neighbors are desperately poor, isolated, and often hungry, but nevertheless protected from the hostility awaiting them on the mainland. During the tumultuous summer of 1912, Matthew Diamond, a retired, idealistic but prejudiced schoolteacher turned missionary, disrupts the community's fragile balance through his efforts to educate its children. His presence attracts the attention of authorities on the mainland who, under the influence of the eugenics thinking popular among progressives of the day, decide to forcibly evacuate the island, institutionalize its residents, and to develop the island as a vacation destination. Beginning with a hurricane flood reminiscent of the story of Noah's Ark, the novel ends with yet another ark. In prose of breathtaking beauty and power, Paul Harding brings to life an unforgettable cast of characters. Iris and Violet McDermott, sisters raising 3 orphaned Penobscot children, Theophilus and Candace Lark and their brood of vagabond children, the prophetic Zachary Hand-to-God Proverbs, a Civil War veteran who lives in a hollow tree, and more. A spellbinding story of resistance and survival, This Other Eden is an enduring testament to the struggle to preserve human dignity in the face of intolerance and injustice. I mean, sign me up. So in the month of June, I focus on Pride books. I like to read LGBTQIA plus authors and stories, and that has been my focus in the month of June. In July, I'm really hoping to catch up to this book because it just sounds phenomenal. I've heard so many really good things about it, and I am very much looking forward to reading it. And, maybe by reading it now, I will sort of get ahead of the conversation when it comes time for some of these book awards, because it feels like this could be a contender for a lot of them. This is published by Norton, by the way. In my book hauls, I like to read a little bit from the opening of the book, so let's do that here. Chapter 1. Benjamin Honey, American, Bantu, Igbo, born enslaved, freed or fled at 15, only he ever knew, ship's carpenter, aspiring orchidist, arrived on the island with his wife Patience, née Rafferty, Galway girl, in 1793. He brought his bag of tools, gifts from a grateful captain he had saved from drowning or plunder from a ship on which he had mutinied and murdered the captain, depending on who said, and a watertight wooden box containing 12 jute pouches. Each pouch held seeds for a different variety of apple. Honey collected the seeds during his years as a field worker and later as a sailor. Let's leave it at that for the beginning of This Other Eden by Paul Harding. Really looking forward to catching up to this book in the month of July. Then we have a book that I have actually already read, Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. So I actually listened to this on audio just at the end of May. I managed to squeeze it in before June when I pivoted to Pride reading. I wanted to try to read another book that was a finalist for the Women's Prize. I'll have my reaction to the winner of the Women's Prize down below. I'm really glad I read it. I loved it. And then I happened, just as I was finishing it, to walk into my local used bookstore, and there was a copy of it on the shelf. So I liked the book enough at that point that I said, you know what, I really would like to have a copy of that on my shelf. Plus, it feels like, unless it stumbles and just falls flat on its face in the ending, this is going to be one of my favorite books of 2023. So having a copy will make it a lot easier to talk about. So here it is. I will do the description that's online, even though I've read this book and can, confidently talk about it. But it's a short description, and just in case, I don't want to end up getting anything wrong. So here's what it says. Amid daily reports of violence, Cushla lives a quiet life with her mother in a small town near Belfast. By day, she teaches at a parochial school. At night, she fills in at her family's pub. There she meets Michael Agnew, a barrister who's made a name for himself defending IRA members. Against her better judgment, Michael is not only Protestant but older and married. Cushla lets herself get drawn in by him and his sophisticated world, and an affair ignites. Then the father of a student is savagely beaten, setting in motion a chain reaction that will threaten everything and everyone. Cushla most wants to protect. Threatening everything and everyone Cushla most wants to protect. I screwed that up a little bit. As tender as it is unflinching, Trespasses is a heart-pounding, heart-rending drama of thwarted love and irreconcilable loyalties. In a place where what you come from seems to count more than what you do or whom you cherish. I know there are people who have really not liked this. I loved it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend it. This was published by Riverhead. This is a debut. Louise Kennedy actually has another book coming out later this year. Spoiler alert, because in July, I am hoping to do a video about my most anticipated books coming out later this year. And she is going to factor into that. Let's do a bit from the opening of this book. Chapter 1, 2015. They follow the guide, a thin, pale girl. She's wearing a linen sheath dress in moss green, and there's a fine spiky tattoo wound around her arm that looks like barbed wire. Cushla moves to the edge of the crowd, away from the French and Italian tourists in expensive rain gear, her own age, which still surprises her. Away from the man on her left, pushing 50, with steel gray hair that's greased back, small glasses, and a soft wool jacket. That is the opening of Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. I loved this book. I thought it was great. It did not win the Women's Prize. I'm very happy that Demon Copperhead did win the Women's Prize, but I liked this book a lot. I hear that some people think it's a little bit slow, or that they didn't. I think a lot of people don't reconcile Kushla's behavior. There are definitely reasons, but I loved it. I think it's fantastic, and I would recommend it to you, and I'm happy to have this copy of it on my shelf in the meantime. That takes us to Greenland by David Santos Donaldson. This is a book that I had heard about. It was a finalist for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, which is this logo right there. And that is actually where it first jumped onto my radar, and it sounded really interesting, but I never committed to whether or not I was going to purchase a copy of the book. Earlier in June, I was in an independent bookstore in Hamilton, Montana called Chapter One, and this was one of the staff picks that they had on there. And I was reading the little blurb that they had about it, which already had me pretty well sold on purchasing a copy. And then the employee who was at the register a couple of feet away from me saw me looking at it, and it turned out she was the employee who had put it on the staff picks shelf. So we had a little conversation about it, and here it is on my shelf. I've heard a little bit of mixed things about it, but I'm really curious. There is a bit of an E.M. Forster connection, and I'm doing the E.M. Forster read-along. I'll have information about that down below as well. There is a prompt for sometime this year. Hang on, I can open it up and tell you when it will be. There's going to be a month where you can read a retelling or something that was inspired by E.M. Forster. That will be in August. So this is something that I could potentially use for that. I don't know if I will. So again, I've heard mixed things about it, but I'm really excited about it, and I'm looking forward to potentially reading it in August, or just, having it on my shelf and getting to it at some point. Here's what this says. Shortlisted for the 2023 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, a dazzling debut novel within a novel in the vein of The Prophets and Memorial. I loved The Prophets. About a young author writing about the secret love affair between E.M. Forster and Muhammad El Adel, in which Muhammad's story collides with his own, blending fact and fiction. In 1919, Muhammad El Adel, the young Egyptian lover of British author E.M. Forster, spent 6 months in a jail cell. A century later, Kip Starling has locked himself in his Brooklyn basement study with a pistol and 21 gallons of Poland Spring to write Muhammad's story. Kip has only 3 weeks until his publisher's deadline to immerse himself in the mind of Muhammad, who, like Kip, is black, queer, and other. The similarities don't end there. Both of their lives have been deeply affected by their confrontations with whiteness, homophobia, their upper-crust education, and their white romantic partners. As Kip immerses himself in his writing, Muhammad's story, and then Muhammad himself, begins to speak to him, and his life becomes a Proustian portal into Kip's own memories and psyche. I think that's the area where this book loses a lot of people, so it'll be interesting to see how I react to it. Greenland seamlessly conjures two distinct yet overlapping worlds where the past mirrors the present, and the artist's journey transforms into a quest for truth that offers a world of possibility. Electric and unforgettable, David Santos Donaldson's tour de force excavates the dream of white assimilation, the foibles of interracial relationships, and not only the legacy of a literary giant, but literature itself. I mean, it sounds fascinating, I think. Here is a little bit from the opening. This is published by Amistad, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. Let's do the opening of this book. Part 1 is The Very Last Englishman. One may as well begin with the gun. I'm holding the neat little thing in the palm of my hand, a Glock 22. It weighs like a sinker with the magazine fully loaded. 10 golden sabers. Such a glamorous name for bullets. The truth about my current situation is that I am locked up in this basement study, confined here for 3 weeks, and I have a gun. Let's leave it at that. That's a pretty catchy opening for a novel, I would say, and that is Greenland by David Santos Donaldson. If you've read any of these books so far, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Now we get to an author who's sort of a new obsession of mine, even though I've only read one of her books. The book is Saratoga Trunk. The author is Edna Ferber. In January, I finally got around to reading His Family, which was the first book that won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction, which at the time was called the Pulitzer Prize for the novel. As part of my Pulitzer Prize for fiction, I don't want to just read all of the books that have won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I sort of want to understand what they mean for their time, why they might have won, why they would have felt relevant at the time, and what else was going on and what else was published that year. So, as part of that research, I looked into other books that had been published the year that His Family won the first Pulitzer Prize for fiction, which again was called the Pulitzer Prize for the novel at the time, and heard about Fanny Herself by Edna Ferber. Edna Ferber later won a Pulitzer Prize for a novel called So Big. So it immediately caught my attention, and I looked, and there was an audio of Fanny Herself on Scribd. I listened to it. I loved it. It's going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I have not yet read another book by Edna Ferber, but I am really going nuts collecting a bunch of her books. Since then, I've collected Showboat, Ice Palace, Giant, and now Saratoga Trunk. I already had a copy of So Big, which is the book she won the Pulitzer Prize for. So you can imagine, I'm really excited to have this on my shelves. This edition is published by Perennial, which is another imprint of HarperCollins. Here is what they say online. The basis for the classic film starring Gary Cooper and Ingrid Bergman, Saratoga Trunk, is Pulitzer Prize-winning author Edna Ferber's enthralling saga of love, greed, and power set in New Orleans and Saratoga during the late 19th century. I guess Saratoga would have to come into the book somewhere, given the title, but... Saratoga Trunk unfolds the story of Cleo Dulaine, an ambitious Creole beauty who more than meets her match in Clint Maroon, a handsome Texan with a head for business and an eye for beautiful young women. Together they do battle with Southern gentry and Eastern society, but in their obsession to acquire all they've ever wanted, they fail to realize they already have all they'll ever need, each other. A novel by one of the 20th century's most accomplished and admired writers, Saratoga Trunk is a lively tale of ambition and love that celebrates the triumph of outsiders against the powerful and corrupt. And that does very much sound in line with Fanny Herself, which is a novel about a woman who has business ambitions and dreams but she's a woman and she's Jewish and she sort of struggles against that and against sort of the tide of industrialism as well. And it feels very relevant today, even though it was written about 100 years ago. And Saratoga Trunk seems like it will very much be in that tradition of book because it feels like it's going to be very relatable. It's about people trying to find their way in a world that tries to corporatize things, capitalize everything, and yeah, I'm sold pretty hard. I can't wait to read more of Edna Ferber's work. I think I probably will do So Big, which is her Pulitzer book again, first, but I'm really looking forward to getting into some of her other works as well. Here's a little bit from the beginning of Saratoga Trunk. Chapter 1. They were interviewing Clint Maroon. They were always interviewing old Colonel Maroon. Though he shunned publicity, never had held public office, and wasn't really a colonel at all, he possessed that magnetic, flamboyant quality which makes readable news. It wasn't his wealth. America had 50 men as rich as he. Certainly it wasn't social position. He and the spectacularly beautiful Cleo Maroon never had figured in formal New York society. It could not have been his great age merely which had brought the reporters into his hotel suite at Saratoga on this, his 89th birthday, for the newspapers had seized upon him with yelps of joy when first he had dawned dramatically upon their horizon at 30. They had swarmed on him throughout the 60 years that had elapsed since then, when he turned 40 at his dashing half-century mark, at 60 when there was scarcely a glint of gray in the reddish-brown hair that was exactly the color of a ripe pecan shell, at 70, 80, 85. And let's stop there. That is a bit from the opening of Saratoga Trunk by Edna Ferber. Really excited about all 4 of these books that I brought into my library in the month of June. Again, I've already read Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. So I've already read 1 out of 3. That's pretty solid. And again, I'm really hoping to read This Other Eden in the month of July. So hopefully when I do my book haul revisit next June, I will at least have read 2 out of 4. I don't have immediate plans to get to Greenland. I might do it in August. So if I do, next year I'll have 3 out of 4. And when it comes to Saratoga Trunk, I think I would do So Big first, and then I might do Giant. I'm going to think about it. So it's definitely one that I would like to read, but I think there are a couple of Edna Ferber books ahead of it in line. So we'll see how that goes. But it's definitely a library builder, and I'm happy to have it in my library until I get around to reading it. If you have thoughts about any of these books that I've talked about or recommendations based on my interest in these books, I would love to hear it in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.